The GOP's petty drama continues because when asked about the high-profile heckling he received from Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz on the floor of the Republican National Convention, former Republican Speaker Kevin McCarthy roasted Gaetz brutally on CNN, and we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we did a video about the predicate incident, so this is kind of like a follow-up, but you may recall that during the Republican National Convention, former Republican Speaker Kevin McCarthy was conducting an interview, or rather participating in one, and he happened to be talking about his former colleague and arch nemesis, Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz happened to show up and heckled him. We covered this in a video, and Kevin McCarthy was asked about it by CNN, and this is what he had to say.
Get booed off.
So that's the way they
you would get booed off the stage.
That's the biggest challenge we have.
He said you would get booed off the stage. What's your response to him?
Well, he looks very unhinged. I mean, a lot of people have concerns about him. And I'm not sure if he was on something, but I do hope he gets the help that he needs. But more importantly, I hope the young women get the justice they deserve when it comes to him.
I mean, you're referring to the House Ethics Committee investigation that is ongoing.
Yeah, with his partner in jail because they paid underage women for sex and drugs. Yeah, that's what I'm referring to.
So he has denied all of that. I'm wondering, doesn't he deserve the presumption of innocence here?
Well, people are in jail. The women have confirmed it. He came to me. If I still wanted to be speaker, I could have done something illegal and stopped the ethics committee investigation that started 4 years before.
He told you to stop the ethics
investigation? Yeah, that's what the whole motion to vacate was about. He wanted me to engage and thought somehow I started this investigation. It started long before I was ever speaker. And as you know, as Congress, I don't get involved in ethics. It's an equal number. They could investigate me. It has to be its own arm and branch. And so he wanted to leverage me to try to do that. And if I didn't, he wanted to do a motion to vacate.
And he's denied that, of course, that he urged you to stop the investigation.
No, I had other members come to me. He came to me. I had other people who were on TV that he talked to. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So no, there's no denying it.
So that's pretty brutal shade coming from Kevin McCarthy there. I mean, again, going out of his way to clarify, yes, I actually am referring to the numerous allegations made against Matt Gaetz and a friend of his for having inappropriate relations with 17-year-old minors. Again, he's going out of his way to elucidate about the sordid details, and he's doing it with a smile on his face. You can see that, Kevin McCarthy, people call him an idiot, and I suppose in some way he is. I mean, politically speaking, he gave away the farm to become the Republican Speaker of the House. It took 15 high-profile public attempts, generated enormous embarrassment on the Republican National Conference, right, the House Republican Party, right out the gate, right after they won the majority in January. And he basically gave away all of the leverage he had in order to get the gavel, and then he lost it within 8 months. And we'll get to Matt Gaetz in a moment because he in many ways is so much more despicable than Kevin McCarthy. But I do want it noted for the record. McCarthy set himself up for failure, because he's supposed to be the leader of the Republican Party, or he was supposed to be at the time, certainly among elected Republicans. And he effectively disarmed himself by, allowing it so that one disloyal person or one disaffected person could trigger a motion to vacate. And so that was the sword of Damocles just hanging over his head for the duration of his, 8-month-long speakership. And of course, he compounded that failure by not reining in the extremes on his party, not just that year, but for the years prior, right? He should have divorced himself from the MAGA Republican movement in the aftermath of Trump's electoral defeat in 2020. But again, stupidly, he went down to Mar-a-Lago and bent the knee. So he helped create this very situation. He reneged on a deal that he made with President Biden with respect to the debt ceiling negotiation. So he obviously infuriated Democrats, and understandably so. They weren't inclined to protect him. Kevin McCarthy's situation was at least as much his own making as it was Matt Gaetz. But let's talk about Matt Gaetz. I'm going to play a clip of Matt Gaetz in here in just a second, because he spoke at the Republican National Convention the next day, or rather, I think it was the same day as his confrontation with Kevin McCarthy. And he had a weird look and some weird comments, but Matt Gaetz has been credibly accused of sexual misconduct, and he is being investigated by the House Ethics Committee, which is a bipartisan committee. It's comprised of an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. So it does say something that those investigations are still ongoing. That's a sword of Damocles which hangs over Matt Gaetz's head. Okay? Now let's turn to the Gaetz himself. This is not, by the way, any sort of like digitally or AI altered image. This is Matt Gaetz apparently, abused the hell out of makeup or Botox or whatever. I mean, you can see it. There's something about his face which is very different than it was 12 hours prior. And this is him during his speech at the Republican National Convention making a comment about the recently convicted Democratic Senator Bob Menendez.
Inflation has gotten so bad, you can no longer bribe Democrat senators with cash alone. You have to use gold bars just so the bribes hold. Inflation has got.
So Gaetz, of course, has the demeanor about him of, use spicy language here, a college fuckboy, right? I mean, he doesn't really take his duties as a United States congressman particularly seriously, and he's very good at trolling people. But something happened to his face, and he's being roasted on social media, which is very, very funny. If there was any substance to his speech, it went right over everyone's heads because they were talking about his comically cartoonish appearance. Not sure what the hell is going on with the Republican Party, but there you have it in a nutshell. Just so easily embodied in the feud between former Republican Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Matt Gaetz. Now, let's talk about the content of that 11-second clip. So again, Gaetz is referring to Democratic Senator Bob Menendez, who was prosecuted by President Biden's Justice Department months ago for corruption and bribery and obstruction. And it turns out he was convicted recently. Democratic Senator Bob Menendez tells allies he will resign after bribery conviction. The New Jersey lawmaker has faced calls to step down from fellow Democrats, including Governor Phil Murphy, who will appoint a senator to finish out his term. Bob Menendez has told allies that he will resign from Congress after he was convicted on federal corruption charges. Two people directly familiar with the conversations told NBC News. Menendez, who'd been defiant for months in the face of calls from dozens of Democratic senators to resign, appears to have finally relented after the guilty verdict and growing threats to expel him if he refused. Now, let's talk about this for a moment. Prior to his conviction, when he was just charged, and by the way, Menendez has a sordid legal history. He was brought up on corruption charges years ago and narrowly beat them, I think, if I remember correctly, due to a procedural issue more than anything else. And then, of course, he was charged recently by President Biden's Justice Department. Prior to the conviction, dozens of Senate Democrats demanded he resign. And this is really important because you contrast it to corrupt Republicans like, for example, George Santos, the recently expelled Republican congressman from New York, right? Republicans bent over backwards to give him a lifeline because they needed his vote. They didn't care about principle, even though they were the party of law and order. Meanwhile, Bob Menendez is charged, and immediately dozens upon dozens upon dozens of Senate Democrats are publicly demanding he resign in disgrace. Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania being one of the most fervent critics. In the aftermath of the conviction, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, a Democrat, the most powerful Democrat in the Senate, publicly called on him to resign. And if he doesn't, it's very likely that he will be expelled, which, by the way, is a good idea. It's a good idea in terms of principle. It's a good idea in terms of optics. And Governor Phil Murphy, a Democrat of New Jersey, will be able to appoint a Democrat to fill in for Menendez for the remainder of his term. This is important. It also further debunks, because in my opinion, it already been debunked, but this right-wing lie that President Biden's Justice Department is weaponized against Republicans to the benefit of his own party. Now, we've walked through why this is a stupid notion. Number one, President Biden's Justice Department has investigated President Biden. Special counsel Robert Hur, a Trump-appointed Republican, investigated President Biden for potential mishandling of classified documents. It was a high-profile special counsel case. It created enormous political blowback for the president, even though Hur declined to press charges. President Biden's Justice Department prosecuted and successfully convicted in court President Biden's only living son, Hunter Biden. That's huge. A father allowed his Justice Department to prosecute his only living son successfully, even though as president, Biden had the power to snap his fingers and stop it, as we've discussed. He had the power to order the DOJ to withdraw the charges. He had the power to fire the Trump-appointed special counsel, David Weiss, fire him as the president. He had the power to do that, and the courts couldn't have done anything about it. President Biden could have also, and still could legally, pardon Hunter Biden, even though he's promised not to, and he allowed it to happen. President Biden's Justice Department's prosecuted Bob Menendez, guy we're talking about right now, and Henry Cuellar, a Democratic congressman from Texas. Those are in short supply during a brutal and razor-tight election year. He allowed it to happen. It would have probably been more politically convenient to not bring these charges and to not create a scandal. But here we are. As a matter of fact, we talked about this. CNN's done analyses on this. For every one Republican or former Republican who has been prosecuted by President Biden's Department of Justice, you can find a Democrat or a former Democrat. It's about as even-handed as a Justice Department can possibly be. Menendez's entire prosecution and conviction and the subsequent calls for resignation further illuminate the stark contrast between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. The Democratic Party is not perfect, but they are just objectively more consistently principled than the Republicans, and this goes to show it. So, interesting that Matt Gaetz chose to bring that up because as far as I'm concerned, this is a really important case to make about why his party, the Republican Party, sucks and why you shouldn't vote for them in November. Let me know what you think in the comments.